Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Dr. Kaivalya T. Desai. I am an assistant professor working at the Department of Social Work, Assam University, Silchar. The module that we are going to discuss today is titled Multiculturalism and Cultural Pluralism. Following are the objectives of this module: to understand the meaning of multiculturalism and cultural pluralism, to develop insights about different political forms of multiculturalism, to understand the debate on space of multiculturalism in social work education, and finally to delineate the challenges posed by new social movements based on multiculturalism on social work practice. So some of the key themes which will be discussed and words which will often get repeated throughout this module are multiculturalism, structural perspective, post-structural perspective, radical social work, macro practice. Basically, multiculturalism is an issue that transcends politics, social theory, and professional practice. It represents a wide range of ideas that are not easy to define. In terms of social theory, multiculturalism means a double focus on equality and distinctiveness. The recognition of cultural pluralism gives rise to a new political imaginary that is centered on notions of identity, diversity, and cultural domination. Before we deliberate on the concept of multiculturalism further, it is important to discuss the meaning of the term monoculturalism. Monoculturalism refers to imposition of a singular culture of the dominant on others, especially the most marginalized and oppressed. While the core values of monoculturalism continue to dominate, counter-cultural pressures in the form of new social movements have challenged this orthodoxy with a pluralistic vision called multiculturalism. But multiculturalism has many variants, signifying its colonization by diverse political ideology. Thus, in a social environment that is multicultural, differences of geographical background, economic class, race, religion, culture, and gender are redefined. Moreover, multiculturalism challenges those universalizing norms that regulate meaning. There are a variety of political forms of multiculturalism: conservative or corporate, liberal, left liberal, and finally critical and resistance. So there are basically four political forms of multiculturalism. Let us start with the first one. Conservative or corporate multiculturalism is essentially monoculturalism. It is intimately connected to imperialism and colonialism. It presupposes the superiority of Euro-American civilization and in particular Anglo-Saxon cultural and linguistic forms. Globalization is a modern manifestation of cultural imperialism, promoting a common culture as the dominant world idiom. Further, the prescription of English as the official global language reinforces this cultural dominance. Lastly, conservative multiculturalism presupposes the superiority of Western intellectual traditions, cosmologies, and education systems. It is rooted in social Darwinism and rests upon the notion of racial superiority. Apartheid and racial segregation are essentially the extreme end of a continuum of cultural and ethnic domination rooted in the idea of superiority. So basically, conservative multiculturalism is monoculturalism, and which looks at domination of the white English-speaking man. Liberal multiculturalism promotes the idea of natural equality between racial groupings, whether Anglo-Saxon, African, Caribbean, Asian, etc. In the West, and Aryans, Dravidians, etc. in India. The assumption is that all races share the same intellectual potential to be equal within the capitalist system. It values tolerance and equal dignity. Rather, this is the essence of its universalism. Moreover, it embraces a common cultural heritage with social work, sharing the same value base. Its influence in social work is consequently substantial, putting tolerance at the forefront of the professional agenda. This same value base is actually rooted in the idea of humanism, which has dominated social work for long. However, critiques of liberal multiculturalists argue that they do not debate or discuss the inbuilt inequalities that result from social and educational structures which allow the whites and higher castes to be advantaged within the current political order. Left liberal multiculturalism seeks to address the problems arising from the liberal stress on sameness between racial groups. It suggests that this view neglects the importance of difference and cultural diversity, which it celebrates. The problem with the left liberal perspective is that it tends to promote essentialism, which ignores the reality that difference is the product of history, culture, and power. From the perspective of professional social workers, this emphasis on the essentialization of cultural differences can become problematic in practice because it leads to exclusionary identity politics. So, basically, the liberal culturalists assume sameness, and the left liberal multiculturalists say that more than this idea of sameness is rather farcical, and we need to actually look at diversity and not just respect it but celebrate that diversity of different cultures. Critical and resistant multiculturalists take a more radical view. They argue that differences are produced as a result of ideological influences and the reception of cultural science. Socioeconomic structures based upon group domination require systems of signification by which citizens are ordered into hierarchies of power and privilege. In this process, binary constructions of meanings such as white, black, good, bad, male, female, normal, deviant, etc., create a regime of representation where negative cultural meanings with the status of norms are attached to subordinate groups. For example, the portrayal of black people as drug pushers, gang members, etc., only creates symbolic social division. Similarly, when we look at the kind of discrimination that people who reside in urban slums face, that they're criminals, slums breed criminality. These are examples which suggest these binary constructions of normal, deviant. Now let us look at as to why the idea of multiculturalism is relevant to social work education. What is its importance for social work education in the 21st century? The politics of recognition is one of the dominant concerns of social work in the 21st century. Two key considerations arise for social work. One, professional consciousness, and second, education. The dominant discourses of social work education are governed by a civic unconscious that determines the normative structures of practice. In a sense, the traditional strategic concerns of social work practice have been based upon the remoralization of the poor for the disciplined practice of citizenship. This is like, we already have an idea of what does it mean to be a citizen, or what is good citizenship, bad citizenship, and thus what we always traditionally many social workers have focused on is the idea of remoralization of the poor and imposition of middle class values on them. Now, who are we to decide whether they are what is immoral about the cultural practices of let's say the blacks, the poor, and other subordinate groups in the society. But therefore, one of the key considerations for social work in the 21st century is this idea of professional consciousness which needs to be re-looked into. Critical multiculturalism suggests that social workers need to intellectually engage with the issues of difference and citizenship in a manner that detaches practice from monoculturalist norms. Traditional social work accepts the compromise favored by mainstream liberal multiculturalism of respecting existing ethnic identities as equal and combating discriminatory and racist practices within the welfare state. However, critical multiculturalism challenges the social workers to interrogate the value assumptions of their approach to practice and assess the principles which they follow in practice. If the social workers are to avoid narrative repression, they need to be capable of challenging discursive hierarchies of meaning in their practice. This means that the point of professional identity formation in training, the issues of difference and citizenship need to be fully deconstructed in the curriculum. First, the received text of social work literature must be challenged. Counter texts interrogate the dominant tradition of Western humanism in social work. This is where also, now many voices have been raised in social work regarding indigenous social work practice, indigenous knowledge base of social work education, because all this, this dominant tradition of Western humanism, which has been borrowed in social work in developing and underdeveloped countries as well, it actually does not suit the context of these countries, and therefore, at the level of the field, when practice engagement takes place, it fails, and this whole confusion also exists among social work students. For example, when they look at the casework method of social work practice and the principles which are rooted in Western humanism, the principles of casework, when they actually go out in the field and try to practice it, they get confused. They don't see the connect. So therefore, all these received texts of social work literature need to be challenged. Second, binary constructions need to be challenged along with the associated institutionalized norms of discrimination. Thus, there is a clear imperative for social work to be grounded in an understanding of culture based upon critical citizenship. See, for example, if you look at the northeastern states of India, when we look at the different tribes in the northeast, their cultures, when we are unable to understand their culture, we forget to respect that. Moreover, what happens is, there's this mainstream culture and there's this tribal culture, and automatically a discrimination exists. And this is what even people of the northeast complain when they visit the mainland. And they complain about this sort of discrimination, and somewhere the fear there is more about losing their own identities, losing their ethnic identity. Therefore, we see that the idea of autonomy is very strong amongst many of these tribes, because they fear losing their culture, and they fear because there's one dominant culture which dominates the which actually oppresses their culture. Forceful attempts to introduce multiculturalism into the social work curriculum and subsequently borderizing the same in pedagogy can prove to be self-defeating, as they are at odds with the value base of social work, which is rooted in liberal humanism. Multicultural education social work education needs to look at the variegated political approaches involved, oppressive systems of signification in everyday culture, the politics of recognition values, and the application of these principles in practice. Unless multiculturalism is explored in the context of deep structure of learning in the humanities, egalitarian discourses will not emerge in practice. Social work education needs to develop a cognitive praxis designed to explore border identities. Borders can be linguistic, spatial, ideological, and geographical. They not only demarcate otherness but stipulate the manner in which otherness is maintained and reproduced. Border identities are at the core of multicultural understanding. Cognitive praxis assists multicultural understanding through the acquisition of knowledge and experience from a series of intellectual encounters. It implies intercultural movement, but perhaps more importantly, the confrontation with difference. As multicultural educators are informed by critical and feminist pedagogies, within social work education, they need to keep themselves as well as the students connected to the power of unacceptable and comfortable with the unthinkable by producing critical forms of policy analysis and pedagogy. It is important as critical educators that they do not manipulate students simply to accept their intellectual positions, nor presume at the same time to speak for them. So this is one caution that multicultural educators need to keep in mind. Having discussed how multiculturalism has come to influence social work education and what kind of different the four different forms of multiculturalism that we discussed and how it has come to social work education. A form of practice which has emerged or emanated out of this idea of multiculturalism and cultural pluralism is this emergence of new social movements as a new discourse in social work, and it has opened a totally new arena of macro social work practice, and it has also highlighted the need for social work profession to engage with these new social movements, and therefore many students have come to at least go and volunteer for different social movements or become part of different social movements. So now let us discuss the new social movements which have emerged as a new discourse in social work. In the postmodern times, new social movements as diverse as feminism, anti-racism, gay rights, disability awareness, grey power, peace, development-induced displacement, and environment have emerged. They've created political and cultural spaces where identity politics can flourish. As a result, progressive politics, so long concerned with class inequalities and redistributive justice, has become more complex, embracing a diverse set of agendas, including the politics of recognition. In this changed political, social, and cultural landscape, social work is challenged to reinvent itself in new forms suited to the contemporary context. The new social movements are making a vital contribution to this renewal and redefinition. Feminist social work has reshaped women's relationship with the welfare state and generated new practice paradigms. This is a very interesting development which has taken place in the sense that when we look at this idea of equity, how strongly it has emerged when we look at women's relationship with the welfare state, thanks to the women's movements, which has also then traveled across to different other social movements and how they have also borrowed that idea. So, for example, disability awareness has brought the impact of a social movement that is simultaneously a service user movement into the center of the definition of progressive practice. Now, so again, this idea of equity re-emerging, to each according to his or her need, and the need to actually respect that, and the need of not looking at that as a service which is being provided, but looking at that as a right of that particular identity-based community, let's say. So similarly, grey power is transforming cultural attitude towards the elderly and raising awareness of the need for generative welfare strategies that support dignity, and independence in an aging population. Anti-racism challenges institutionalized discrimination in our society and demands new practices. Gay rights have heightened our awareness of the relationship between sexuality, culture, and power. More so, what it has also highlighted, gay rights movement along with the women's movement, they've also highlighted that, how gender is a social construct. It was so internalized that we never even differentiated between sex and gender. Sex might be a biological construct, but gender is a social construct. And it was so internalized that if women's movements won't have emerged, or the gay rights movements won't have emerged, this idea would have never been challenged. So, this and this is something that becomes important for us social workers to recognize, because for us, uh, in this postmodern society, these social constructs need to be analyzed, understood, and then in that process, they need to be uh, they need to become a part of our pedagogy, they need to become a part of our practice. Thus, new social movements have raised crucial issues for social work that could transform its approach and deconstruct the traditional division between the individualist and community orientations. These are that citizenship is gendered, that the personal is political, and of the need for anti-discriminatory practice. Moreover, we may be witnessing the emergence of a global civil society that is reordering the relationship between equality and difference. Thus, social work must adapt to these powerful social and cultural changes that represent a deepening of democracy. Now, let us recapitulate what we've discussed in this module through a short conclusion or a summary. First, monoculturalism and multiculturalism are essentially polar ends of a continuum. At one end is the idea and practice of cultural domination, and at the other end, the idea of emancipation. There are a variety of political forms of multiculturalism. Conservative or corporate is one, liberal is another, left liberal is another, and finally the critical and resistance. While these variants have overlapping elements, the categorization of multiculturalism into different ideological components is important because of its political contextualization. The debate on the space of multiculturalism in social work education is a critical one, and two key considerations arise for social work, namely professional consciousness and education. The dominant discourses of social work education are governed by a civic unconscious that determines the normative structures of practice which need to be challenged. Critical multiculturalism suggests that social workers need to intellectually engage with the issues of difference and citizenship in a manner that detaches practice from monoculturalist norms. However, the promoters of multiculturalism in social work education need to be careful of detraction. Fearless questioning in pursuit of truth necessitates a profound compassion and belief in humanity. Ultimately, multicultural education is about the exploration of the cultural spaces where border identities are constructed, whether linguistically, epistemologically, or intersubjectively. Finally, the new social movements situated in diverse cultural contexts have come to influence social work practice in 21st century, demanding the recognition that citizenship is gendered, that the personal is political, and of the need for anti-discriminatory practice. Thank you.